There are so many ways to introduce Liaquat Ahamed, a former professional investment banker, an ex-World Bank staffer. One can go on. It would be best, though, to introduce him as the amazingly prescient author of The Lords of Finance, The Bankers Who Broke the World, a book that has grabbed everyone who has read it. Welcome, Liaquat. What prompted you to write this book? Were you being prescient?
I wasn't, but I will take credit for one insight, which is that I began to realize that Western capitalism was being subject to more and more frequent crises. We'd had one in 84, we'd had another one in 87, another one in 90, another one in 94, and then another one in 97, and then 2000. And so I decided to go and study the mother of all crises, which was 1929 and the Great Depression, and this book is the result of that.
How does the current crisis compare to the Depression?
Well, the sort of overall architecture of all crises is fairly similar. But comparing this to 1929, both began with a bubble. Then it was in the stock market, this time it was in real estate. Both bubbles were caused by a mistake in Fed policy. Then it was an over-easy Fed policy to try to promote recovery in Europe. This time it was an over-easy Fed policy in the early part of the decade. Both bubbles burst, as bubbles always do, and in both cases we had a banking crisis that ensued. So the development into the crisis was remarkably similar.
And does the similarity end there?
Well, the advantage we have over the people in 1929 is we have their example not to follow. So looking at 1929, we now know what not to do.
Okay, you're not going to do those things. What are they supposed to do, and are they doing that?
Well, I think we're applying the right medicines. I mean, so far in the U.S., we've cut interest rates to the bone. We've started a major stimulus package, and most importantly, in the fall, it looked as if the financial system was truly going to collapse in November 2008. And central banks threw everything they could at the problem and have stopped a heart attack in the Western financial system.
You talked about the fact that you need to do much, much more, and the political will may be missing. Can you kind of explain that?
Sure. Getting the political support to get a massive injection of equity capital into the banking system is problem number one. Problem number two is the one emerging market area that got heavily into debt over the last few years is Eastern Europe. I think the third dimension is the U.S. in a position where it is incapable of providing the leadership, in part because it's got into so much trouble itself. And it's not clear the other players on the international front are willing to take on the mantle of leadership.
And the one key difference between 30s and now is the new addition to the new kind of economic players, as it were, China and other emerging, the BRIC countries, for instance. So does that kind of alter, A, the impact of the crisis? There are many more people who will suffer. B, in the recovery process, does it kind of help that they are at different points of the crisis at this point of time?
Yes and no. I mean, I think, look, one of the things that's forgotten about the Great Depression was it was a global phenomenon, and we really had four different centers of power. We had the U.S., we had Germany, we had France, and the U.K., and each of them was pursuing their own agenda. We now have maybe more players, but not that many more. Europe is somewhat cohesive. We've got China as an entity. We've got India as an entity. There are a lot of people who are at the table, for example, of the G20, who are not players. I mean, they're actually crowding up the field. And really, the key players are 6 or 7 of them.
Is the worst behind us?
The financial crisis, the worst of the financial crisis is behind us, in the sense that the banking system, we've injected so much money into it, both through temporary loans, through central banks, and now through equity injections, that it's beginning to function. The momentum of the economy is still headed downwards, and will probably be headed downwards until towards the end of the year. So unemployment's going to keep going up. So in that sense, I think the worst of the sort of unpredictable elements is behind us. I suppose the danger is that we get a sort of another fault line developing. That's why I've been writing about Eastern Europe, in part because what happened in the Great Depression was one of the sort of signature events was the collapse in 1931 of an Austrian bank called Creditanstalt. Now, Austria was a tiny country. The notion that a bank in Austria would go under and bring the whole Western financial system down was unimaginable then. But it started a sort of series of dominoes, and sort of my nightmare scenario is that we get a new fault line developing somewhere in Europe, and that adds to the existing fault lines, and we get another sort of down leg to this whole sort of cataclysm.
And do you think that this crisis, eventually when it settles and the world recovers, will lead to the acceleration of a new world economic order?
No, in a word. But I do think what it will lead to is a complete rethink of banking and finance and the sort of whole move to completely deregulate banking. So I think that we will end up with a variant, both in the US and in Europe, a variant of Glass-Steagall, where we basically say there is one portion of the banking system that has to be boring and safe, and those are the big, large commercial banks. And I think we'll have that in Europe, and we'll have that in the US. And then there's another portion of the financial system which is allowed to gamble, if you like, and take bets, but we will be much more careful about making sure that they have enough capital to make those bets. And we will never allow a situation like AIG, where AIG was essentially insuring the world against financial catastrophe and didn't have the capital to sustain that insurance.
Thank you very much, Liaquat, and thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Anil.